At American University, we don't just hope for change, we create it. We don't just dream of a better world, we make it a reality. With a graduate degree from AU, you'll access expert faculty and connections throughout DC to develop skills and experience to turn your passion into purpose. And that purpose can make all the difference in your career. Discover the difference a degree makes at american.edu/grad school.
You are listening to New Theory Radio. Theory Radio.
Hello and welcome to another edition of New Theory Radio here on CFRE as well as iTunes. I'm your host, Nav Nanwa, and this is a show where we theorize on all things current affairs, pop culture, and everyday life. And today is International Women's Day, and I'm very excited to welcome two guests, two women that I respect very much that are killing it here in the community. I'll start with the person on my left. She is the executive director of an amazing organization called Broadening Horizons that's really spreading great awareness when it comes to equality as well as stopping, various bad things that are happening in the world. It is my good friend Nav Singh, another Nav here. Hope it doesn't get confusing. Nav, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Fresh from a painting expedition.
Yeah, one of our workshops on the power of one.
Yeah, and you have no paint on you, so.
No, I wear an apron. So
okay.
I've gotten better with practice, like keeping myself a little tidy here.
Next time we'll have you paint during the actual show.
Definitely.
And we'll see what happens. And then sitting right beside you is one of my homegirls. She is a spoken word artist and as well as a mom as well. We're spending like an hour talking about her beautiful daughter Momo. Give it up for my good friend Alyestal. I say give it up like there's an applause or like an audience in here. Snap. How you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
I'm so happy Ren is taking care of the little ones so you can do the show.
Thank God for husbands.
I know. Thank God. Especially on International Women's Day.
Right?
Represent. But I really wanted to talk to the both of you. The great thing about both of you is the fact that you guys are obviously hustlers in your own way. And today is a very special day. And I wanted to just take a step back and really dissect what International Women's Day actually means to people. And I thought this would be a good show to talk about that. And first and foremost, it's no secret that the theme of this year's International Women's Day, or the hashtag that they're promoting, is balance for better. And a lot of that has to do with a focus around a gender-balanced world. And this is like across the board. So when you're talking about industries, when you're talking about jobs, when you're talking about everyday life, making sure that whatever's happening, there's balance when you consider genders in everyday life. And I wanted to just start off discussing this theme and what it actually means to you and what your theory might be as to why the folks at IWD. I wonder if IWD has like a government body that kind of chooses like today is that next year this is the hashtag. But just what this theme actually means to you and whether it actually resonates when it comes to some of the things that you may be dealing with on an everyday basis. And Nav, because you have the same name as me, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think definitely it's really important to create balance, and however, in many different forms. In this particular instance, like International Women's Day, so it was actually coined by the United Nations in 1975.
Oh, a little history lesson.
Yeah, so actually I had to look it up to make sure like I knew the facts about it, because it's actually been such a historical thing across the world, and to understand like where its history is from can help you appreciate it or understand kind of why it's even acknowledged as an international day, and how do we celebrate it around the world is really different depending on the country that you're in. So balance is a really interesting theme that they kind of chose and continue to play with. And I think it's kind of helpful to even get people to think about balance in the sense of gender, but also balance in the sense of life. Like, how do you create balance amongst yourself? So I kind of appreciated the theme because it doesn't spark just the understanding around gender equality, but overall balance in terms of people's self-care, people's respect for community. So I could really resonate with it, and it does have a huge following on social media. And so
totally.
definitely, I think they have a team of people that like sit there together and think about hashtags, collectively, kind of creating something that they think is going to really catch on and get people thinking. And this particular organization has done so with this year's theme. So
yeah, it's great that they've actually chosen a theme, and again, the whole premise of International Women's Day is really to celebrate the women in your life and struggles that they've faced and where they've come. But it's great to see that theme sort of resonate with a lot of different people when you talk about transgender, when you talk about people that are non-binary, who don't conform to any type of gender.
Exactly.
But they're still focusing on that balanced kind of message. Alyestal, what are your thoughts on this theme?
I've definitely struggled with the word balance.
Oh, okay.
Simply because in motherhood, I have realized that balance is like near impossible. And I think to Nav's point in terms of thinking about balance, not just in equality and equity, but also in just life and self-care, I've realized that balance is like this unattainable goal. So I've really kind of strived for harmony. And the way I've understood harmony is much more like parallel. And in its parallelity.
That's a sick word.
Right. But in just different motions and tasks and just everyday activities of your life, not everything is going to take precedence at the same time. In order for a harmony to actually work, everything has to play different parts at different times. So I think regardless of how I understand or how anyone understands balance or harmony, it's definitely addressing the fact that we have to be looking at this perspective from a more wholesome picture versus just like, this is what it is, period.
Yeah.
It's much more like, it could be this, and 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 we have to be searching for some kind of harmony amongst all the different perspectives of even how we interpret gender, how we interpret identity, how we interpret femininity, how we interpret what rights for women look like in different settings, in different countries, on a personal level, on a systemic level, and just having a wholesome picture of it all.
I love how you related balance to your current life stage as being a new mom, because you're starting to see, specifically in workplaces, paternity, maternity leave. So, leave obviously being offered, to women. In your case, you're one of the first cohorts. Can I talk about how you were one of the first cohorts that had 18-month maternity leave, which is great, because I think the more time you have with your child, the better. But on the flip side, you're actually seeing men who are taking paternity leave to share that same time and allow their partners to get back into getting into a routine. Do you feel similar to what we've seen happen in instances like that we're seeing more of that balance exist in other areas of our lives? And as a new mom, what are some of the challenges that you face when it comes to finding that balance?
I think the biggest challenge is definitely perception, because it's not necessarily that all the challenges are all the same for all the moms, but it's definitely a perception of the challenges that exist in terms of how you can balance it all. So there's a lot of, for me personally, like I have a perception of re-entering the workplace and that being a struggle because of some of the stories that I've heard of. I saw this meme and it was literally the perfect embodiment of how I felt. It was Big Bird sitting at a boardroom table and then it said what it looks like when a mom returns to the workplace.
That's funny.
And I was like, that's literally what I feel like.
As far as it wasn't Peppa Pig,
right?
Like
No, honestly, that's a whole different story. But just this perception that I can't balance between returning to the corporate world and motherhood, and that I somehow have to stay in like this freelance artist, entrepreneur, creative entrepreneur space in order for that balance to actually happen. But then also understanding too that balance, the true understanding of feminism is not just in equity for women, but equity for men, and understanding that they can too also have paternity leave, have parental leave, period. And in that parental leave, understanding that there has to be a room and an acceptance for them as well, and taking that time away from the workforce to be able to pour in and to build a foundation for their families. So again, that just a perception. Is it okay for men to do that? even this evening, leaving Momo with my husband, our neighbors had said to us, "Oh, so you're babysitting?" And it's like, well, you can't babysit your own kid.
Wow, that's fascinating.
And there's a lot of people that have this perception that the father of the children or child is babysitting their child when they're looking after them in the mother's absence, which is wild because it's like it takes two people to make this child. It must take two people to raise this child. So just perception is definitely, I think, the biggest matter of balance, because sometimes even in self-care you perceive that you can't do it, because if I take a shower I'm hearing phantom cries, oh my lord, I can't take a shower, and it's like, no, that's not realistic. It's really finding that balance between the needs of the people who are dependent on you and the perceptions of what you really are thinking is happening and what really is happening.
Nav, what are your thoughts on balance and sort of the perception that exists when you think about roles amongst gender? Or gender-based roles, I mean.
I love how you put it. Like, it's definitely a harmony, right? Like, there's different forms of balance. And so, especially when I think about gender roles and in employment especially, I can just think about my own personal experiences. Like, growing up, I had brothers. And so being and talking about entrepreneurship, my parents have always owned their own business. And so being put in a space where me and my brothers did the same job, regardless of our genders, we both were able to kind of contribute in the same way, created a balance amongst our family, right? And that can be seen very differently among other families. But for us, that's how I kind of grew up with balance. So I definitely can reflect on it like that. It is a harmony, and it's created depending on your community almost, right? And what the needs are of your family or community or whatever space you're contributing to at the moment, right?
Is there any examples, and obviously we talked about paternity and maternity leave being the one that's more evident within sort of everyday life now here in Canada, but are there other examples that you guys can think about, you women can think about, I don't mean to call you guys on International Women's Day, that you can think about that have a similar type of relationship or have evolved over time? Like, I'm trying to think about if there's situations where, we did have select roles for individuals, and it was always perceived that the husband was the one that needed to work overtime while the wife needed to be at home sort of caring for the children. And that's sort of the narrative that you've seen, in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and all of a sudden it's changed quite a bit now. Is there anything else that comes to mind when you think about balance and just how far we've come?
I think definitely like the ideas of gender roles within families. I loved how you gave the example of your husband babysitting.
Yeah.
Also, when like a husband cooks, they're like, "Oh my God, that's so sweet! You cook dinner,"
Right?
And it's like, well, I had to cook dinner anyway. Like we got to eat, right? So just going back to like roles that are not actually paid jobs, even like how we create balance among our families in that sense, right? Like, cooking is a job, right? And so like when one person does it shouldn't be this like amazing thing that you've done and you get rainbows and butterflies. Now it's like, oh, thank you for contributing to what we need to do to stay alive, right?
Exactly.
So I think like looking at gender roles outside of just paid work, looking at it like through our life basically, right?
I read this article a couple days ago, and it said Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are planning on raising their child gender neutral. And I read the article because I was like, this is an interesting thing, like royal family booking tradition.
Considering how conservative they are, too.
Right? And when I read the article, I was uncontrollably laughing because I was like, this is ridiculous. Because when in the article, what it was saying was pretty much they will raise their child based off of this rumor. They will raise this child to not conform to gender norms and tasks. They will allow their child to be raised in a home and in a space where they see mothers and fathers doing different roles that are not based off of gender. So a father may cook or clean or do laundry or care for a child while a mother, I don't know, changes a car tire and takes out the garbage or unplugs the sink or whatever it is. And I couldn't stop laughing as hard as I was because it's, to Nav's point, that's life. This is just how we have to live to survive. If I sat around waiting for Reynolds to do things, like, it could never get done because he's such a busy person. And if he sat around waiting for me to do things, it would never get done because we have things to do. So, it was just like, it was such a shocking article to read, to think that this was such a surprising thing of gender neutrality, when I'm like, that's not gender neutrality, that's living and existing as a family.
It's I kind of think about my past experience over the last year. Like, I actually left my job and then went back to school, and then I wasn't working for 4 months, and my wife was the sole earner that we had in our family, between us two. And it was like, we both had that agreement, and it was totally fine. Like, she was giving me the time to kind of figure stuff out. But I remember for like my parents, it was a little weird, because they're like, oh, well, you know, she's out working, you know, maybe you should go find a job too. and it wasn't like, obviously there was more to that when it comes to me sort of figuring out what I wanted to do. But I think it wasn't ignorance that my parents were showing, but it was more so the idea of the wife's working full time and providing was just something brand new that they weren't used to. Yeah. And I took full pride. Like, I took full advantage of the time that I had in living off of my wife. Like, I was admittedly calling her, you know, my sugar mama. But at the end of the day, to your point, could I have done that like 10 years ago? And based on where we are from a gender sort of masculinity standpoint, you know, would I openly admit the fact that I wasn't working? I don't know. Like, that's what always interests me about my situation last year was, you know, 10 years ago, would that have been okay? Or would I have just jumped to the next opportunity because I didn't want to, you know, be perceived as someone that wasn't pushing my weight or playing the role of the male, per se.
Or perceived as a man living off of a woman. Yeah. Which is the craziest perception, because it's understood socially, for whatever reason, that women are supposed to live off of a man. And if you're in a partnership, which is marriage, you're not living off of your person if you're supposed to be one unit. Which is crazy to think that we would think, or like we being a society would think, that we're living off of our person. We're one person. We're one unit. We have to pay taxes to prove it. Like, it's really such a strange concept.
It is. Yeah. Certainly. Nav.
No, definitely adding to, like, you know, culturally and traditionally, that plays a huge role in it, right? Like, how do we in our family see the traditional way of a family, right? Because there are communities that are matrifocal, where women actually lead the household, and so it's not different to see your mom or your grandmother do almost everything in your household, and your father actually just be a somewhat kind of provider. And so definitely bring it back to, like, reflecting on our cultures and our traditions, right? So, like, our parents coming from different backgrounds might expect that already, that this is the way that our society is focused. So.
Just to close off this topic, do you guys like this hash? Sorry, I keep saying guys. I'm going to start picking this up. Whatever, we're making that term gender neutral today. Do you like this hashtag? Or, you know, if you were planning International Women's Day, is there another theme that you would have chosen to focus on for this year based on things that have been happening over the last few months or few years?
That's a good question.
We might have to have, like, private meetings.
All right, I'm going to press pause on the podcast. We'll be back after this brief message.
Like, discussion about this before.
Don't worry, take your time. I'll edit this gap out.
I was thinking, to be honest, that it's a very Western viewpoint. Because balance is a privilege. If it's survival, there's no balance. You're surviving. If you don't have an option, there's nothing to balance.
Yeah, wow.
What are you doing? Balancing the one thing between your right hand and your left hand? Like, there's no balance. There's no other option. So I was thinking it was a very privileged perspective. That was my first implication of just, like, balance for better. Like, what if your better is, that means that there's an option. What if your better is actually best, and that's all you've got in this season?
Yeah, wow.
And you don't have something else. You're precariously employed, if you're even employed at all. If you have that freedom and liberty to be employed, do you have autonomy over yourself, over your body, over your personhood? All those types of questions are raised. And in other countries outside of North America, for instance, that's not guaranteed. And even within North America, based on your class, that too is not guaranteed. A perfect example is just looking at, like, the 60s and second wave feminism and stuff like that. Women of color didn't have a choice if they got to stay home or not. You had to work. You had to figure it out. There was no better or balancing. It was, the only thing you had to balance was work and family. Like, you had to figure it out. It wasn't, do I feel like going to work today? what? There's no
true.
choice. So for me, balance is really like coming from a place of privilege, of choice, that there's an option, that there's potentially better to weigh out. So
Yeah. Nav, any thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. You can't see my head shaking. But I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying, Alyestal, because it's so true. You're right. It comes from a place of privilege, right? And your balance is created by opportunities that you actually have to decide what you can choose to do or not, because in some situations you're totally not at any choice, just to echo what you're saying, right? And so I think I totally agree with you. We do need to come up with a different concept around it. But I think just moving forward, just having whatever kind of platform you're sitting with is within that, regardless if it can get better or not, to find something that makes you feel okay with that, right? And so I think that's the end point.
That's a good segue, I guess, to the next topic, and that's really just around the concept of International Women's Day. I sent you guys an interesting article that I found from a publication based in Kamloops, BC. Kamloops is in BC, yeah. Don't ask why I'm reading publications from there, but pretty much the actual title of the article is "There Shouldn't Be an International Women's Day," and the writer, who is female by the way, says there shouldn't be an International Women's Day because she felt it puts too much emphasis on gender inequality. And even when I was reading the article, it kind of felt like she was talking from a bit of a feminist point of view. But I wanted to get your theory on this because like outside of International Women's Day, I've heard people that get disgruntled about Black History Month. They're like, why are we still celebrating Black History Month? Like, we're still putting emphasis on the fact that we're being mistreated. Or, why is there a Sikh Heritage Month? Why is there a South Asian Heritage Month? Like, why are we celebrating, minorities as an example when we're really just putting emphasis on the types of issues that they've been facing over the last couple of years? So I wanted to open it up and kind of get your theory, get both of your theories on this regarding International Women's Day, and whether or not you feel, in the climate that we live in today, should we still be having days and months that are, promoted to really put emphasis on some of these oppressed populations or oppressed groups? And at least we'll begin with you.
So when you first sent me the article and I clicked the link, I read who the author was, and it said Katie, and I was like, I don't know a person of color named Katie. But that was just like my initial reaction. I'm not gonna lie. So I took the liberty to Google Katie's name, and she was what I thought she was, a white lady. The article's concept, before I read it, this, of course, my initial take was, again, this is coming from a place of privilege, because privileged people say, why are we doing this? Why are we having this? Why do we have... And it's like, because you are included, you don't realize why we need to have this. So right off the top, I was like, Becky, stop talking. Like, that was my initial take.
Oh, you killed me.
But, however, upon further reading, actually reading beyond the author's name, she did talk about some interesting points of, we really need to be aiming for a day when we don't have International Women's Day, because we are meeting that equity par across the board all over the world. But the reality is that probably won't happen.
Oh, yeah.
So, Becky, we need International Women's Day. Katie, we need it. Simply because, just because you're comfortable in 80% white population Kamloops doesn't mean that your Aboriginal Indigenous community is, or that the Chinese community because these are big minority groups that live in Kamloops. I looked it up because I was like, this doesn't sound right. Because in the article, she actually starts it off by saying, when I was in school, we didn't have to talk about these things. You probably didn't go to school with anyone you needed to talk to about these things. So it was such a privileged article.
I love the research that you did.
I did.
You probably creeped her Facebook. You probably...
No, I actually went on her Instagram.
Little census data on Kamloops.
No, I did. I actually did a census. So this is like my social anthropology degree coming out, where I was taught you need to question who's giving you the information. And I questioned it because I was like, Katie, your husband is a banker. And you live in Kamloops, that's not cheap. And you're white. So why, who, who, what, where, when, why, just why. I just had a lot of questions in terms of how she reached this conclusion. So outside of that point of like, let's actually strive for not having an International Women's Day, I really felt like she was privileged in that opinion. Yeah.
No. I think you come from a good place in regards to the point you're making, because, again, to your point, a lot of the people that tend to question why we do the things that we do aren't directly affected by the actions. Mm-hmm. So I think your call out is definitely fair. Nav, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It's important to address the shit that happens in our community, because if we don't address it and we don't make people aware of what's happening, there are people that pretend like this is not actually happening, right? Or they haven't been aware of it, or they haven't been exposed to it. It reminds me actually of our project that we do, The Power of One, because it's an art-based project, and we actually talk about bullying and discrimination. And the first component to the project is where people actually have to identify their own experiences of discrimination, using a word, a term, a phrase, a statement, or a symbol that kind of reflects their experience. And so a lot of times people ask me, like, why are you talking about the negative stuff? Like, why do we actually have to paint this? Like, this is really sad. And I'm like, yeah, it is really sad, but this shit exists, right?
Exactly.
Like, it's in our community, and actually the words that you're sharing that you've experienced harmfully, the person in the room with you that's sitting across you probably never ever thought that word was harmful to somebody, right? And so just the reflection on when you're exposed to it, then you then have a reflection that this is actually what people experience around me, right? So like having months or having days or having, times that we acknowledge and put emphasis on social issues just helps make the community more aware of that this is what's happening. And yeah, we have to move forward to it, like from it, and we have to work together to move forward with it. So I think just to bounce off the article, I can bring it back to like work that I do in the community, and you can really see, again, the people coming from places of privilege struggling with the concept of why are you addressing colonialism? Like, why are we talking about racism in the same room, in the same group of youth that are a part of, a youth group that are having kids from Syria that are talking about the experiences that they're having and how it's coming to our country as well. So it is really important that we do address and continue to highlight the social issues that really do impact our communities.
Absolutely.
Do you feel with these occasions still being celebrated, are we moving... Okay, well, because the whole purpose of this awareness that we have when it comes to International Women's Day and South Asian Heritage Day, Heritage Month and Black History Month is to really celebrate. But the end result is to get people to think differently. Do you feel like we're moving forward or backwards when it comes to celebrating these occasions? Like, do you sense that we are progressing because we're continually celebrating and trying to provide awareness? Or do you find that the fact that we've been celebrating International Women's Day since 1975 just goes to show, like, not much has changed since then? And maybe we'll begin with you.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely has, like, you do end up with this feeling of, like, things aren't going to change, right? Like, just even coming out of the thought about International Women's Day, we can look at, like, the Aboriginal community, right? The First Nations, Indigenous community, and how a lot of times, a lot of experiences are seen as not being able to move forward from them. But unfortunately, the situations that people have been put in causes trauma that you actually can't move forward from, right? And so you can't actually move forward without addressing it and reconcile what we actually did in these communities. So I think it does take work from the community actually to do something to heal for the community to heal. And regardless of the theme, I think it's along the same points.
Absolutely.
Yeah? Lisa, what are your thoughts?
Coming fresh out of Black History Month. Literally the busiest month for any Black artist I know. It serves a purpose. And I always tell people, this is how I know it serves a purpose. When you look at me, you don't say, oh, she's a mom and she's a wife. You say she's a Black woman who's a mom and a wife. My Blackness always comes first. My womanhood always comes second. Both of them always come before any other title I hold. This is how I know we need to have Black History Month. We need to have International Women's Day. We need to remember our past, because if we are not acknowledging these challenges and these struggles, to echo what Nav was saying, we lack that awareness. We within the Black community know that these systemic things are happening, that these social things are happening. Unless you are experiencing it or you are a person of color, the likelihood is you have no awareness of that. What other time are you going to learn about Black history? Because they're not teaching it in school outside of the month of February. So really and truly, until it's integrated into social and systemic culture and rules, we still need to have this. I mean, a perfect example is also the Oscars. This whole process, they tell you that it's open to everyone, but like, it's crazy the fact that I think it's like 18 years since a person of color has actually won like Best Actor or something like that. Like, it's just ridiculous statistics like that, where it's not actually open to everyone. This is why we end up having things like, say, the NAACP awards and stuff like that, because we're not getting awarded in any other capacity. And what to people are like, well, you're segregating yourself. Why don't you just integrate? Because systemically we've been excluded, and we're still dealing with the repercussions of systemic things that had happened through colonialism and imperialism that have not been undone, that are still in many ways on the books that we're adhering to. So we have to acknowledge it, we have to address it, we have to speak about it in order to change it.
I was going to say, like, talking about award shows, I think the BET Awards are my favorite because it's just like a gigantic party. If I can go to any award show, it'll be the BET Awards. Everyone's like up dancing, having a good time. I'm just like, man, I wish I was there. No, that's a great way to sort of close off this topic as well, because I think to both of your points, like, we need this constant reminder, because if we don't have it, we're not going to move forward. And I think that's the whole premise of why we continue to celebrate days like today. The last topic that we are going to discuss, and it's actually something that I saw make quite a lot of news when I was looking up different topics for IWD, and that is really the rise around the female entrepreneur. I know U of T is doing an event where they're honoring female founders. I'm glad to have two entrepreneurs sitting, here in the studio who both run different businesses. And it's interesting that Forbes came up with this article because it really talked about how the fastest growing segment of startup companies are actually women-owned businesses. And to even put that into further context is, businesses actually owned by Black women have a larger share than those owned by white women. So you're actually seeing not only are women becoming owners of their own business, but you're seeing a bit of an influx amongst minority owners, which is great. Would love to get your theory on this trend and the fact that we live in this era of the boss lady where, we love to see women go out there and be successful and really, enter into a man's world and take over. Do you feel like this shift in entrepreneurism is the pendulum shift that we've been expecting for the last 40 to 50 years when it comes to having women in prominent positions? And Nav, we'll begin with you because you actually are, not only do you do Broadening Horizons, but you also run the Bake Shop.
Yes,
it's called
I
Bake
do.
Shop. Yeah, which you didn't bring any sweets for us today.
I didn't.
So
Sorry, I came. I told you I brought
that.
the art stuff today.
I know.
I wear many different hats, and so it's actually quite fun. But so the Bake Shop is actually a business that I started a while ago. It came out. I work with my parents who actually own their own business as well, which is a grocery store that sells groceries from around the world. It's called Jazz Supermarket. Shout out
Cheap
to
plug.
them. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm going to send you the invoice later.
But I shout them out because they actually were my foundation on actually understanding and really learning about this. And I think this article was really interesting, but I think it missed a huge component that women of color were always entrepreneurs in a sense, right? Like from the beginning of time, women of color had to create things to sustain themselves, right? Outside of just, being able to be employed for whatever skills that they had in a task or labor job, they did things on the side to make money. And I can just reflect on my grandma who hustled in the sense of she had a full-time job working as a nurse, but would sew clothes at night just to make means, right? To provide for her children. And she was an entrepreneur before they even used the term entrepreneurship in the sense. So I think when we really go into this even further, I can even say for my family, my mom is one of the strongest entrepreneurs I know, that she holds down my parents' business more than my dad sometimes is able to, because it's just within her blood to do so. So naturally, I feel like starting a business myself was really something that I felt like I needed to do in a sense. I was taught that you can have a government job and you can have a job, but you find something to really make sure that you hold yourself. And baking was something that I did just on the side, and I had a love for. But when people started requesting it, I was like, no, I had to get smart about this. I had to make sure like I had a system that like I wasn't. I had to, in a sense, I had to make sure that I wasn't getting burnt out. That I had, I love my social work, and so how do I continue to do that and then still have this thing that was just my self-care, but now blew up as something that like people are starting to request, right? So I think like when I was reading the article, I just kept thinking about like my own family and ancestry, and thinking about like they were entrepreneurs from like not even out of choice. They just did it out of means of survival, right? So entrepreneurship's a deep thread in a lot of our communities. So
yeah, it's not even a trend in some areas. It's really just a way of life.
It's a way of life.
And I think about like my mom loves to knit, and she like always like makes us scarves. And one time I was like, man, these scarves are actually dope. Like, Mom, why don't you just start selling them? She hasn't taken me up on the offer yet, but it's crazy to your point when you guys have these skills, like you're saying, guys, you have these skills, and it's really around finding when those skills are in demand, it's really kind of taking advantage of those opportunities. Which in this case, the way I kind of read this article was, it sounded like there were a lot of females who, maybe weren't given the right opportunities, or, were disgruntled at work because it was a strongly male-focused industry that they were in, and they went off and created their own opportunities. But I really agree with you, because I, as someone who, grew up in an ethnic household, you saw the grind that, kind of exists when you go to like ethnic grocery stores, or when you go to restaurants and you see, boss ladies in and around there kind of holding shop and doing everything. Alyestal, what was your thoughts when it came to the rise of the female entrepreneur? Was it even a rise? I don't know.
I was like, well, obviously your findings are such because Black girls are magic. Obviously. No.
No bias at all.
No bias at all. No, but really and truly, I think Nav really hit it on the head when she said, this is just what we've been doing.
Yeah.
It's our ancestry. It's a part of how we were raised. It's what we've seen. It's not any different. Even if your mom was a stay-at-home mom and that there was that opportunity to be a stay-at-home parent, I'm sure she was still hustling, whether it was childcare for other people's children, whether it was baking or knitting or mending clothes or whatever it was. Something was happening in your home that was work, that was paid work, that was more than just everyday work. As women of color, we're oftentimes precariously employed. As women in general, we're more precariously employed than men. So to gain any sense of security for yourself, you have to own something in some capacity. My parents are from Jamaica, and there's a running joke amongst our community that, like, Jamaican people are amongst the most hardworking people because there's like some West Indian hours that happen. Like, I don't understand how you have 5 jobs. There's 24 hours in a day. It's 2:00 in the morning. Where are you going? Work? What? But it's like, this person's really going to work.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's just a mentality that comes from historically the fact that indentured servitude was a thing. When colonialism could no longer work in the capacity that it was, imperialism just took its place through indentured servitude. Let's just ship a whole boatload of people over. You think we were going to rely off of, like, say, for instance, Britain's giving us anything? No, we had to make for ourselves. My dad grew up with his grandmother, and there's just certain stories that are shared when he'll be doing something as basic as cooking, and he'll make coconut oil from scratch. And I'm like, how'd you learn to do that? And like, this is not from Whole Foods. like
the real thing.
Right? This
is that real
the whole thing. Like, and I'm like, how'd you do that? And he's like, my grandmother, she did this and sold it to people. Like, this is just what we do.
Wow.
My grandmother died when she was 92 years old, and my grandmother was selling stuff out of her house because that's what we do.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, Grandma, like, you're retired. And she's like, no, I'm working. I have work to do. I need to go back to my house. My customers are looking for me. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just a part of what we do. And it's a way, too, that we build community.
Yeah.
because we are serving our community. We notice that there's a gap in our community, and we're serving our community, and we find that as an opportunity to meet our means, in service as well.
How do you find both of your experiences when it comes to female entrepreneurs or female-led companies and their hiring practices for hiring other females? Do you find that the relationships between both the employee and employer, if they're both female, hit it off right away? Like, do you find any friction? Like, 'cause I'm curious to kind of get down to that level, because I've heard different types of stories. Obviously, there, when you think about the common workplace and some of the stuff that exists, and unfortunately, I've actually seen it happen to my wife in the world of consulting, where you do see some gender inequality, but sometimes you do see a little bit of friction when it's the same gender as well. And I think in the article they talk about Bumble as being like one of the best examples, because it was a female. Like, if you look at their entire board of directors or entire like C-suite, like, it's all female majority. And I've always been curious because to see how welcoming everyone is to each other versus that sense of competition you might feel. Like, what are some thoughts on that? Just this sense of women supporting other women. Does that exist?
It exists.
Yeah.
I think it takes, to be very super honest, it takes very strong women to support other women, right? And I think that's how you create leadership in a sense. I think, like, if you are a woman, regardless, you want to make sure that the people around you are uplifted just as much as you are, to do the best job that they can do as well. I don't know. It's hard to think the other way almost.
Yeah.
But I can understand that there are people that do think that way, that like there's competition in a sense, but it's not competition. If we're both doing good, we're all doing good. And that's bringing it back to that concept of balance and equality, or however we want to kind of frame it, right? Is like, how do you make sure that people that you're working around are at the same capacity as you, right?
Yeah. Sorry, go.
I think the thing with that too is, to your point, it's so hard to think in the opposite way. If it's a part of who you are, whether it's naturally or you've worked very hard to get to that place of thinking, it's very hard to think the other way. So when you encounter it, you're like, whoa.
Yeah, like even when you're telling me, I was like, oh yeah, that does happen.
Yeah.
But like, how do you...
And that's the thing, like, I've personally encountered it where it was like, oh, I'm so excited to work with you, blah, 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 blah. And it was like, no. And it was very, like, appalling. It was very shocking. I was so surprised to encounter it because it's just so opposite to how I feel and think, because regardless of gender, if I'm working with you, if we're in a community together, what's the point of you not doing well? It means I'm not doing well.
100%.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point of view to look at. And just to change the topic a little bit, I actually came across a very interesting article. So we talked about sort of the rise of the female entrepreneur and whether that's true or not, because it sounds like, a lot of people have been already doing that, and I guess Forbes is just catching up. But there's an article that actually Harvard Business Review put out regarding women of color in the workplace, and it actually says women of color get less support at work, and here's how managers can change that. And what it actually does, I think I just opened up a can of worms, that's fine. But what it really focuses on, which is interesting, is about how a lot of women of color, especially those who have come from different countries, have some of the strongest work ethic ever. And again, to your point about Jamaica, Alyestal, like, again, we joke about 5 jobs and like 24 hours, but that's just the grind, the way of life. And what they're seeing here, but specifically in the U.S., and they actually bring up the Hispanic population too, is that those minority populations aren't making up the C-suite, even though they're notoriously known to work as hard as anybody else. And a lot of it really has to do with finding those mentors or those sponsors in the workplace. What are your thoughts on that? Like obviously, I think all three of us can sort of see where this insight's coming from. But do you see that changing? Do you see more and more managers maybe leaning in and maybe trying to change that narrative when it comes to the so-called American or Canadian dream, and allowing females who come from different countries to come in and make their mark? Or do you think there's something that's always going to hold them back?
I feel that unless we have things like International Women's Day, Black History Month, Sikh Heritage Month, and so on and so forth,
bring it all back.
We can't get a change, because if the C-suite doesn't look like the people who are trying to get there, it means that they lack that awareness. It means that as a man, you don't know the woman's plight. As a white person, you don't know a person of color's experience. So we need to have this awareness in order for that change to happen, in order for people to lean in. And I think that if we don't have that change happening, then it's like that awareness, then that change won't happen. In one of my poems, I actually have a line that says, when you're black, you got to try extra, extra hard. Mm-hmm. Every person of color knows that to be true. Mm-hmm. You can have, I remember growing up, my parents used to be like, it's great, you got an A, but you got to have an A+. And it wasn't just like that ethnic mindset. It was, if you don't have the A+, they're going to find that as a reason to exclude you. Because as a person of color, some people have a mentality. And to be honest, it's not even people. It's society, because systemically it's created to exclude you. Mm-hmm. So unless we have awareness and we have advocates and allies who are willing to lean in and clear that path for us, it's going to be very hard to see a true reflection of who is working for and in organizations and companies reflected in places of leadership.
And I guess, to your point, the fact that we need those sponsors, we need those advocates, I think the fact that we are seeing a rise in female entrepreneurs, specifically those that are from minority populations, I guess the hope is that that's what's going to change that narrative, and that's going to actually make that come to prominence in regards to a more holistic approach when it comes to dealing with different employees in the workplace. It's funny, is this article, I'll have to flip it. I feel like we could have done a whole episode on this. I can't believe I just... But there's actually one interesting thing I do want to talk about, and this is kind of deterring a little bit, but it actually says that minority women actually, according to the U.S., according to this article, actually face a lot more sexual harassment in the workplace versus... I guess American women per se. That's fascinating, and I kind of think about. I watched Beale Street Could Talk, which I thought should have won Best Picture. Amazing movie. And then there's that one scene where she's working the perfume counter, and pretty much a white male came up to her and like held onto her hand and like sniffed it and got a little creepy. But I think that's like. Do you think that, like, are you surprised by that? Are you surprised by that stat? Nav, like, what do you think? You're nodding your head pretty hard.
Yeah, you can. It's nodding this time, but definitely I think that's a normal occurrence for a lot of people, or women of color especially, that we just kind of oversee. And there are so many incidents that outside of the workplace that we experience it, that it's just brushed off as being, or seen as something that, you're just experiencing. And that's the really sad part. But I think, like, to add on to your part, like, a conversation like this is acknowledgement, right? And like, we're acknowledging that these things are existing in our community so that we can move forward. When we just say that they're here, but we don't actually call them out, people can't move forward from them. And that's the really sad part about it. And even if you go back to the Forbes article that you had talked about at the very end, there was this huge part about like how women of color lack the self-care part. And so just going back to the whole concept of balance, if you're working all these positions and you have to work 3 times as hard sometimes, the balance is not almost possible, right? And so, like, I think, like, summing these articles up, they can keep talking about this stuff, but this is reality for many people, and it's not like this shocking thing. It's something that occurs all the time.
Totally.
I think that's the biggest thing. These articles aren't shocking.
No.
They're not surprising when they align with your lived experience. What's more shocking about the article is the fact that it's an article that's supposed to be somehow surprising.
Or who it's surprising for, actually. Going back to the place of privilege, when people are like, oh my God, right? It's like, okay, like you actually never had to experience that then, right?
You don't know what it's like to work in retail and have a white man come to your job every single shift and follow you around the store and pretend to buy something so your manager actually doesn't think anything's wrong because he keeps saying, but I want this shirt, and doesn't actually want the shirt at all. You don't know what it's like after you close up shop and you're going home or to your car and you're frightened that that customer that you had to tell them, no, sorry, I'm not interested, might be outside waiting for you. I remember Gabrielle Union's a perfect example. She was, I want to say 18, but I could be wrong at the age, but she was working at Payless, and she was raped after her job, after her shift.
Oh, wow.
These are real fears because these are my real lived experience. I've had it where I'm like, I don't know if when I leave, this person will be there. I don't know if when I go in, this person will be there. And it's just this idea that I think some people, some men objectify women of color as other in such a way that they can disconnect, that they feel that things that would not be permissible with other groups of women is permissible with a woman of color. And they don't realize that we are all human, but it takes a toll on having that balance. Because if you're a woman of color who's already precariously employed, to have that happening in your workplace is exhausting. There is no room for balance because you're dreading to go into the job that you finally got that one shift for the week, because you don't know what you're going to come up against.
Yeah, exactly. One last question regarding this topic around the female entrepreneur. Being that both of you are entrepreneurs, how do you think, actually, what's the best way to phrase this? How do you go about running your business? Is there anything that you sort of keep in mind when it comes to, whether it be in performing arts and being able to perform live, or when it comes to selling desserts? Is there anything that you try to keep in mind to keep yourself grounded when it comes to being a female entrepreneur, and making sure that when you're going for an opportunity or when you're trying to grow your business, that you're taking into account some of the adversity that you might face? Again, no one likes to think that way, but the harsh reality is it does come up. Obviously, we've seen a lot in the performing arts world when it comes to pay inequality, where some people are getting paid females are getting paid pennies compared to some male leads, which is very surprising. And then same goes in the entrepreneurial space. Sometimes you'll see just that sort of disrespect that exists between both male and female entrepreneurs, where it becomes a good old boys club, and you see a lot of male entrepreneurs sort of take increase their masculinity and try to sabotage someone else's business. So I'm curious, how do you take this into consideration when it comes to running your businesses? And at least we'll begin with you.
For me, I make sure that I'm always remaining professional in terms of being an artist. As a creative entrepreneur, a lot of people have this idea that we're unprofessional. We don't know how to operate a business. We don't understand how to draft an invoice and submit it. That we are going to work for free. That somehow having some kind of opportunity is sufficient to pay our bills. So always maintaining that level of professionalism in terms of, if you ask me for a bio, I got it ready. Headshots professional, a speaker's kit on the go. I have those things on point, and also having my pricing on point. Knowing that while I work with a sliding scale for certain organizations, student groups, community groups, etc., when it comes to corporate, this is my price, period. If you're a church, that's a conversation we can have. If you're a student group, that's why the sliding scale exists. But you're a corporation. This is my fee. Why are you trying to haggle me out of it? I can guarantee you would not be doing that with anyone who did not look like me. And I can guarantee you would not be doing that with a consultant, for instance. But you would want to do that for the performing artist. Okay, well, this is my fee. If you don't want it, then I'm sorry, we can't do business. So definitely having to grow in my confidence in that capacity of just saying, this is my number. But also having a price list that I know, that I don't necessarily share with others, but that I know, so that that's my point of building confidence, of saying, no, this is my number. And if I feel like increasing it with you, then we'll do that too.
Interesting. Nav, what about you?
Very similar, keeping focused on, especially you do usually get undercut it. Even though this is a bakery, there's a creative element to it, because I'm making somebody's cake out of scratch and using just their thoughts to kind of artistically put something together. So it is a form of art. So definitely just sticking to the prices, telling people my time is going to take me 6 hours to make this. I'm going to charge you 6 hours worth of my labor to create this item for you. And there's been a lot of pushback, but no, just, give me your family price. And I don't know what that really means.
Right.
But
we call that the homeboy discount.
Yeah, but kind of staying
or the homegirl
true
discount.
to the values, because the organized or the business actually came out of the need of the community actually needing desserts for spaces our open mics, or for community youth groups and stuff like that. So we were creating treats that were kind of affordable. So the sticking to that concept, and that goes to our values, right? Creating a sliding scale as an artist. is something that an artist with values for community will actually
Right.
do, opposed to artists that are just about the corporate side of it, right? And so I can really appreciate that. And then holding firm to, like, you know, not fitting into these gender roles. Like, I was going to the market with my dad when I was younger, carrying boxes and all of those items. So, like, I know that frontline work from the labor to the management kind of position. So staying true to kind of the work itself.
Sweet. That's a good way to cap this episode off. Thank you to the both of you for celebrating International Women's Day with me. Really appreciate it. And before we conclude today's episode, where can the listeners get in touch with the both of you? And Nav, we'll begin with you.
Yeah, so you can look up the not-for-profit organization Broadening Horizons, so BROADENINGHOR. I hope I spelled it right.
We'll put it in the description box.
So Broadening Horizons is the awesome organization. They do we do a lot of really cool work in the community.
Yeah.
And then The Bake Shop, it's actually spelled THABAKESHOP.
So gangster.
Yeah, it was. It started like when I was in high school. It kind of stuck with me. So.
Sweet. Yeah, next time bring some sweets.
Thank you for not. I'm trying to lose this conversation.
Oh, please. Alyestal, how can everyone hit you up?
I am literally the only Alyestal in the world. So if you don't know how to spell my name, you can find me, and it is spelled ALYESTAL.
That's crazy. So you haven't found any other Alyestal yet?
There's literally no other Alyestal because my parents came up with my name.
Yeah, I remember that.
So it comes from my great-grandmother who was Indian in Jamaica. Her first name of Alice and her last name of Sital. Sital being the anglicized version of Chital.
Wow. So you got some Indian in you.
Yeah.
Wow.
My mom is actually half, and my dad was raised by his Indian grandmother.
Crazy.
So that's just imperialism at work.
That's it all comes back to imperialism.
It's true.
And if you want to connect with New Theory Radio, it's at New Theory Radio on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And if you want to connect with me, it's at Nanwa on Twitter and at Nav Nanwa on Instagram. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you to the both of you for joining me. This has been a fantastic episode, and you will hear all of us next time. Peace.
At American University, we don't just hope for change, we create it. We don't just dream of a better world, we make it a reality. With a graduate degree from AU, you'll access expert faculty and connections throughout DC to develop skills and experience to turn your passion into purpose. And that purpose can make all the difference in your career. Discover the difference a degree makes at american.edu/grad school.